we move on into our next session, I'd like for Luke Ralph just to come up. He's just got a few words just to share with us. Thanks.
Thanks, Paul. I think this is just God's sense of humour for me throwing a few people under the bus to be the talking point at the table before. And I don't know if it's the biggest stitch-up for me or for you, but I've been invited up to lead you in a chorus of happy birthday because today is Jason Hewitt, head of junior at Emmanuel's birthday. And so if you could all join me in your best rousing ACS voice. You need to stand up, Jason, Steve said. So you need to stand so we can honour you appropriately. And we will go. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Jason. Happy birthday to you. Hip hip. Hip hip. Hip hip.
That's great. Nice little segue into just reminding us that one of the pillars for ACS is that we are a fellowship of believers engaged within Christian education, and to be able to celebrate birthdays and to have lunch together and to really build that fellowship across the state is fantastic. So something that's very important to us as ACS. Our next session, we are looking at a discussion titled, "If we could free up further resources, where would we direct them in order to improve the common good?" For this session, we have Dr. Andrew Johnson and a little bio on him. Andrew is the principal of Redlands College, a Peter XII Christian school of approximately 1,380 students at Wellington Point. Prior to this role, he was the Queensland Executive Officer of Christian Schools Australia and the principal of Heights College in Rockhampton. Andrew has both business and education degrees and was awarded his doctorate through Lipscomb University in Nashville in the US. Andrew is committed to faith formation and the flourishing of students across the spectrum of their abilities as they undertake learning journeys within their school communities. Andrew has been married to Danielle for 25 years and they have 3 children, Laura, Harrison and William. Would you please welcome Dr. Andrew Johnson.
Well, thank you, Paul, and good afternoon, everyone. The topic for this session, if we could free up further resources, where would we direct them in order to improve the common good, essentially has 2 parts. And as I'm speaking through, I'd invite you just to be thinking about these 2 parts. The first part is the process of getting resources or freeing up resources, the vehicles that might be adopted to do that. And then the second part is, if we have those additional resources, how could we then use them as Christian schools in the broader education area to achieve the common good? Secretary-General of the United Nations, Ban Ki-moon, gave a 2008 speech at the John F. Kennedy School of Government in which he said, "Now more than ever, we must be bold. In these times of crisis, when we attempted to look inward, it is precisely the time when we must move pursuit of the common good to the top of the agenda. Global solidarity is necessary and in the interest of all. Pursuing the common good will require addressing a set of global challenges that hold the key to our common future and the flourishing of all." The bishops of England and Wales wrote in the Common Good and Social Teaching, a document from 1996, that the common good implies that every individual, no matter how high or low, has a duty to share in promoting the welfare of the community, as well as a right to benefit from that welfare. Common implies all-inclusive. The common good cannot exclude or exempt any section of the population. If any section of the population is in fact excluded from participation in the life of the community, even if at a minimal level, then that is a contradiction to the concept of the common good and calls for rectification. So this document then continued on to articulate three elements of the common good. The first, it means that the needs of all people are met. So not just a few, not just the wealthy or the powerful or the educated or the healthy, but everyone. Number two, it includes the flourishing and the fulfilment of all people in the different elements and dimensions of their humanity. And so the common good would include that which is intellectual, physical, relational, and spiritual. And the third element, it refers to what is good that can only come about by being shared. Either that or that which is good and by definition is common to all. So they argue, and I would contend that we here today would agree, that when we speak about seeking the common good, we're not simply referring to meeting everyone's material needs, but also to meeting relational and other needs that are fundamental to human existence as unique individuals who live together in community. So, before we address education, what might be a really practical example of common good that we can use as a bit of a template for our discussion? And so today, in Australia, like in many parts of the world, I'd simply like to use access to clean water as an example of the common good. So all living things need water to survive. People, plants, animals. Governments of countries are therefore charged with the duty to provide clean water to their citizens. And they do this by building dams and reservoirs or through other means. At times, this infrastructure is then handed over to private companies who have a responsibility to maintain that infrastructure and ensure that the water is delivered to people's homes. To pay for that maintenance of that infrastructure, a company may then charge people to use that water. If the government did not provide an adequate water supply, they would not be meeting their obligation to the common good. If the company failed to maintain that infrastructure or failed to supply water into homes, they would be failing to meet their obligation to the common good. Whenever we have an extended drought here in Australia, and we recognise how precious water is as a commodity, and when we see that water being dwindled away, we see how state governments are then forced to introduce restrictions in the use of that water. Why? In the interests of the common good, to ensure that it remains available where it's most needed. So both individuals and businesses have a duty to follow these restrictions. And when people ignore those restrictions, or they continue to hose their driveways or water their lawn, then they are failing to act in their duty or responsibility towards the common good. And so as we just try and think about that scenario and example, we recognise that the common good concerns the life of all. It is common because it applies to everyone by virtue of what we share in common, and that is our humanity. It presupposes respect for all persons, and it presupposes respect for individual people. It concerns the flourishing of human life in all dimensions, because we recognise that the flourishing of individuals is linked closely to the well-being of society as a whole. We recognise that the quality of our communal life together is only enhanced as we work together for the common good. Working for the common good implies that we work to create the social and political conditions for many different people to thrive within the single shared common space. We recognise that Thomas Massaro, who is a prominent thinker in this area, writes, to speak of the common good is to recognise that there are numerous proper goals in life beyond our own individual and private benefit. Responsible people look for opportunities to contribute to worthy causes and to improve society, even when the benefits of this progress will go primarily to others. everyone has an obligation to promote the common good by making whatever contributions are necessary to improve the lives of all. And so today we're posed with this question: how do we, as leaders within the Christian schooling movement, contribute to the common good, particularly in the context of, if we had additional resources to allocate, where would they go? Now, if we think about Australia's education model, every tax-paying adult contributes towards education. Even in a family where we have two people working and they have no children, they continue to contribute towards education in Australia through their taxation. If we consider this from the perspective of promoting the common good, we would say that all people contribute to society simply because they are members of that society, and that all will ultimately benefit from a good education system. However, we know that the gap between ideology and pragmatism is always a rough space. And so we recognise that tensions arise from these models, particularly with respect to the division between state and non-state education, and the models of distribution of resources between state and Commonwealth governments. So what are some questions that might naturally arise in our conversations around the tables today? First of all, a discussion around the value, awareness and acknowledgement that education is indeed in and of itself a common good. The endeavours that we could pursue to broaden access for all students. Our obligation towards Indigenous and disadvantaged students. The vehicles of engagement that are used to increase resources available for the educational provision for the common good. A discussion on the topic that if governments have an obligation to act for the common good, do we as organisations also share that same obligation? Would for-profit schools play a role in contributing towards the common good if used in a model similar to public-private partnerships that are used in water distribution or in health? And so let's just think about these two categories as we now have a conversation. If we think about resources, how can we leverage foundations, bequests, bequeaths and wills, sponsorship arrangements with business, or partnerships with tertiary providers to increase the available resources? Once we've looked at that resource area, we then turn our mind to the common good and we think about these areas. What value do Christian foundations from a Christian school play in contributing towards what we would call the good life, or what we would articulate in the creation of a good citizen? What role do we play in mental health, as was shared earlier? What about family structure and relationships? How can we contribute towards effective parenting within our communities? What role could we play as larger schools in supporting or establishing smaller schools in regional areas? What about the missional work that we do both domestically and overseas? So they are just prompt discussions for what we'll talk now in those two categories: resources and increasing those, how we might use them to enhance the common good.
Okay, we might move into our time of just sharing one thing as a table that you have discussed, and also if you'd like to, or have you articulated something that we might be able to think about longer term for ACS to be able to work with. So going back in reverse order, so we're going to start with this table here.
Yeah. I suppose we came around back to a conversation around, well, is our biggest contribution to the common good stewarding our resources well into our current student body and the opportunities and things that they have, while still maintaining a bit of a posture of generosity and support to the greater cause of good education and Christian education. But that idea of stewarding what we have, and I think Craig raised a pertinent question about freeing up resource from within our current, if you look at only our current income of either government funds or parent funds, how that may look or appear to our clients.
Thank you. This table here?
Yeah, we talked around about, where do you get the resources from and then what do you do with it, obviously, and there was a lot of discussion about that, but I guess one thing we just discussed a little bit was those points of synergy where what's good for both the individual student and the school and also the broader community, and trying to highlight those. So we were thinking, in our own school context, we believe it's a good thing for our school community to be having a goodly number of students with special needs, and to be, effectively resourcing the education of those kids, because that's it's good for the kids, it's good for everyone. There's no downside in that. And then contrasting that, I guess, with occasionally there are highly prestigious schools with extraordinary resource bases which get a pretty bad press because they seem to have absolutely everything, and there's a sense of exclusivity amongst that. So just trying to think through, when we've got these resources, there's not many public forums anymore that service our whole community, and schools potentially can be that. So where we've got plant and facilities and that we can leverage to benefit our more broad community, then that's probably a good witness. It's good for our kids, it's good for everyone. Yeah.
Thank you. This table over here?
We took the opportunity to think about how, as Christian schools, perhaps sometimes we can be insular, and it was a good challenge to think outside that. But we ended up talking more about what we currently do and how could we extend some of those opportunities. So thinking about resources, not just in terms of resources or finance, but in terms of our campus, but also our students and our graduates and our teachers and expertise. Love the challenge by Christine, love hearing what her schools are doing. So even looking maybe not as far broadly as we should, but what are some steps that we are already taking, and how do we not have those just as tag-ons, but actually as core components of who we are as Christian schools?
Fantastic. This table?
So we reflected back even what we were talking about this morning on character building, and spoke about how very much we're geared often as Christian schools to focus on character building and service in terms of bringing out the common good. And we spoke briefly about even graduates who go off to become good employees, serving the community that way. We also spoke about the idea of prioritising the common good as a focus as being mission critical, particularly in processes of budgeting and things like that, rather than as an added extra.
Thank you. Anyone from this table?
Going back to our original mission and vision, what is it that we're trying to achieve? What is it that we're doing that is actually achieving it, and prioritising that's where resources are put. As people have said already, maximising what we already do that's already in place. One of the most powerful strategies we believe for our common good is evangelism, and therefore we really want to be encouraging the next generation of Christian teachers. They're actually going to have the greatest impact on the common good in a broader sense. But they're not just our local society, but our global perspective, because there are countries who want access to Christian education, and how can we maybe partnership with Heritage College to provide that. And one action step could be that ACS could be a conduit of collecting small amounts of money from a whole range of Christian schools, and providing scholarships to students who we all know from our own schools who would make great Christian school teachers, but who actually lack the finances. And then we could, be sewing back, because we need good Christian teachers coming to our schools. And then, of course, just very practically sharing the resources that we already have that we are not necessarily currently using to their fullest extent.
Fantastic, some good ideas. Do you guys want to speak, or?
I think that's a great suggestion, Ruth, and I notice Jeannie's at your table, so she'd be excited about that. Investing in our future teachers. I was reflecting, we didn't get to the finances so much, but we've got tens of thousands of alumni from our schools, and a few people have mentioned that already. And when you see and just know some of their stories, they are really already doing great stuff for the common good in their a broad range of different vocations. And part of what Lynn will focus on tonight is our Millennials project and starting to highlight that on your behalf. We've got 23 that have just been published, and there's an invitation to keep nominating a second round of students, alumni, in your schools who, in a whole range. We've got army, we've got arts, we've got medicine, we've got law, we've got pastoral. So we want to really tap into that network of people who are doing amazing things far beyond what we ever thought that they may do when they were in front of us in the classroom. You know, just now, as a ACS organisation, there's 27,000 future alumni in our schools right now to add to that in the next decade or so. Amazing resource.
Fantastic. Oh, I'm emceeing. I'm passing on the buck for this one.
Convenient, so good. Yeah, look, we looked at a couple of different things. It's good having a table that's got both city and regional schools here at the moment, because the concept of common good is going to look very, very different in those particular settings. And so we talked a little bit, as Leighton was talking about, alumni and how to tap into that and that ownership with the college and everything else as well. But the resourcing as well, we looked at the opportunity of the current modern day age now, and especially the last 18 months, and the explosion of virtual, and what can city schools be doing to support regional schools in a virtual capacity in terms of students who need or want to do this particular subject but just can't access the teacher or can't access the resources, and yet there could be a city school that's doing that subject, recording or live streaming classes, etc., and allowing those opportunities for those students in that regional aspect. And that could go at a school setting, and that could also even go, dare I say it, to a tertiary opportunity of training teachers in that virtual capacity in particular regional centres there, to be able to ensure that good Christian teachers are being able to stay in those areas and service those particular schools for the years to come.
Thank you.
We were thinking lots around the regional schools, because we're from city schools here, and supporting Christian teachers getting into the regions. And a couple of ideas that came out around that were around, teacher swap programs between the regions. Say you've got a young talented teacher, they could go to a regional school and develop their leadership skills as a head of department and come back and be of great benefit to your community. But probably one for the business managers to sort out, this next one. We discussed actually within the ACS sector of the possibility of portability of long service leave between schools. If that's what makes it attractive for someone to go to a region, for a school to just bank that long service leave with them, and that could be a good thing. Can I do a second one? Go for Paul. At Genesis, that's where I'm from, just today we opened a brand new Year 2 facility, and I'm very proud of it. Go on our Facebook page and check it out. But one of the things we realised with that team of teachers is if you're a primary school teacher and say you've been at a school for 10 years, it's highly likely you haven't seen another teacher teach for that amount of time, and or very rarely. So we're very interested in developing a specific suite of pedagogical practices in this team and our whole primary school. So we took the whole team out for a day to go to another school, to a Lutheran school, to sit in their U2 classrooms for the day and sit and learn. And it was possibly the most impactful professional development that team of teachers say they've had in a long time, and what they've learnt by being in that environment and coming back, they've been quick to implement in a really fantastic way. So if there was some kind of way that we could collaborate within the Christian schooling sector to collaborate in school visits, not just with ourselves but with our teachers, that could be of huge benefit.
Fantastic. This table here.
We talk about collaboration, and you just mentioned then about, the PD and going to visit community schools, from down here on South Side right up to Townsville. We welcome each and every one of you to come and visit our schools. you're welcome at any time to any of our schools. We were talking about resources. Resources generally are going to be specific to your school, your area, even though we're talking about the common good. For us at community schools, things such as psychologists, occupational therapists, those sort of allied health, especially being some of our schools quite remote. It's about being able to have access, not having to wait 9 months to go to an appointment. For the ACS, make contact. I urge you to make contact with the people, everybody here throughout ACS that are the informed people in the areas where you're seeking to further your education. So whether it's, talking with Christine about mental health, if there's an area specific to your school, there's such a richness here, not just in this room, but across all of our schools. And I guess lastly, our greatest resource is not just us, it's our students, it's our communities, it's everybody's with, everybody that's in those communities, so make use of that.
So we had a couple of different conversations going in a couple of different directions, but from the conversations I was involved in across our two different schools, both schools have a real heart for their families as well as the students, and there's such need in our families for just growth and development, connection, but also the modelling of family life, of marriage, of raising children, all of those sorts of things. And so we're not just in the, I think we all know, we're not just in the business of educating children, but ultimately we are educating a community, and that what we do has the potential and the opportunity to affect a whole community. And so even though our schools have got different contexts and we're both doing those sorts of things and those sorts of work, but we also see with the freeing of resources, we could do so much more for our communities, and I think we all have a heart to do that.
I think that's it. Just bear with me as I transition from the floor to the lectern. Andrew, thanks so much for speaking today, and I know you handballed it to me to keep the conversation going, but you do need to come up one more time to at least receive your gift. Let's thank Andrew. It's a very thought-provoking session, and I think one of the things that I was contemplating and just thinking about when it comes to those resources, as a principal, how do I think about strategically work with my board to think about what are the risks against a particular decision, and really having that strategic input from our boards is also very important to make sure that we're all on the same page. So that's something that I certainly took away from that session.